I am swinging from a 7-story window, throwing parties in a 10 by 7 cell. It's astounding the lengths I'll go to convince the whole damn world I don't need anybody's help. Yeah, I am waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. I'll try to use your body as a life raft, 'cause if there's room enough for one, there must be room enough for two. I'll sail the good ship you into the sunset, sipping on savory water till my liver turns blue. Sha-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Is broadcast in the evening news. I will be relieved. La, la, I am waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. I'm waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. La, 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 la. Singing, hey, hey, alright, yeah, I wrote that one myself. It's astounding the lengths I'll go to convince the whole damn world I don't need anybody's help.
All right, put down your pens, put down your pencils, step away from the keyboards and settle in for this week's episode of Writer's Block. First and foremost, allow me to thank Low Tide Kava Bar for the kava that I'm drinking on today's episode. Bula Vinaka. Also, allow me to thank Muddied Waters Media for allowing me to do this program. And Don and Sally Wright, thank you for giving birth to me because, well, as a Matthew, I am a gift from God. I am very pleased to announce that I am bringing on another gift from God today. Matthew Hurtt, the Director of External Relationships for the Grassroots Leadership Academy, which is the training arm of for the Americans For Prosperity Foundation. Matthew, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be on, and again, happy to not have to remember another name, being a fellow Matthew. Really excited about the opportunity to chat with you today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, you went to Middle Tennessee State University, which is located in beautiful Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Yes, I actually studied history and political science with a minor in secondary education, and always wanted to, this will be important for later in the show, I always wanted to be a high school history teacher until ultimately my education professors warned me about the bureaucracy that was public education and that I would be frustrated in that system and ultimately took another direction.
Huh, that's actually pretty interesting because when I first went to school at George Mason University, one of the things I wanted to do was become a history teacher, and then quickly I decided I don't want to work in the public education system, so I went a completely different route.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, ultimately, as we talk about over the course of this episode, what it is that I do. I actually find myself in classrooms and training opportunities with people who want to be there, who are engaged in the process that is this American Republic, and who have a vision of what it means to be truly free. So it's really cool. I actually all of the secondary education skills that I learned at Middle Tennessee State University, I have applied over the last 10 years in activism, promoting the cause of free societies and freedom and opportunity.
Excellent. Yeah. As you and I met at the YAL conference in Reston, Virginia, a couple months back, and we started talking, and I found out you were from Tennessee. I used to live in Nashville, as you know, and so I know a ton of people that went to Mitsu, as they call it, and a lot of really good people, a lot of really good libertarian thinking people, freedom loving people seem to have gone there. But at the same time, I know a lot of people who went very far left out of there. Which I'm imagining would be most schools, but Middle Tennessee seems to have matriculated numerous people who are pretty freedom loving, and I've always respected that about that school.
Well, and two of the cool things, two of the most notable things that have been produced at Middle Tennessee State University is, one, economist James Buchanan is a graduate of Middle Tennessee State University, famous for public choice theory, actually very, very close with the George Mason campus up in Northern Virginia. The legacy that he left in the field of economics is felt there. And in fact, as of the fall 2018 semester at Middle Tennessee State University, they now have a political economy research institute, which was established with a grant from the Charles Koch Foundation, which I'm certain that we'll talk about throughout the course of this podcast. And the head of that is a professor named Daniel Smith, who comes to us from Michigan. But I met him a couple of months back, and he said his first introduction to freedom and to opportunity was when he received a copy of the law from somebody at the Foundation for Economic Education. And so it's fascinating how not only how impressive the product of liberty is at Middle Tennessee State University, but also how connected I am to that experience. When I was 19 and still living outside Nashville, I ran for local office, and I met a guy on the campaign trail who gave me a copy of the law. And that was my first interaction with something that was tangible, and it really informed and solidified what it was that I believe about the proper role of government.
Yeah, when I was living in Tennessee, I was not as involved in the freedom movement as I was after I left Tennessee. When I was living, in Nashville proper, and that meant that I was drinking heavily. And because I think that's all you really do in Nashville. Anytime as many people know, I quit drinking 4.5 years ago now. But anytime I go back to Nashville, all my friends are like, let's meet up at a bar. I'm like, I don't really do that. But once I got out of Nashville and I came down here to Florida, I got a copy of the law and read it for the very first time, which was weird being my age. And that was when a lot of things started coming together for me. All of my political ideals that I knew I believed in started to make even more sense, and I was able to discuss them a lot better after reading that.
Yeah, and I agree there. There was always something in my philosophy that I said, if the choice is between control or centralized planning or government power, and the people decide, I have always had more faith in the people, and really to read that, and it's such an easy read. It's at the time that I read it the first time, I was working at a bookstore in Murfreesboro, and between customers at the cash register, I would read and highlight important passages, and I found that I had highlighted almost the entire book. And so, there are folks here in Murfreesboro, actually where I am now for celebrating the Christmas holiday, who still give out copies of the law. And now in my professional capacity at the Grassroots Leadership Academy, we also give out copies of the law. It's one of those things that is, a lot of people say, what really informed your ideas around liberty or even libertarianism. And some people say Ayn Rand, and I personally just think that it's tough to get through a lot of her writing. And for the average person, for the person who isn't steeped in political philosophy, and I don't blame them for not being, The law is really a digestible. You can read it in an hour or two. It's only about 60 pages, and the concepts are really tangible in a way that even some fiction like Rand and others just doesn't provide.
Yeah, I was gonna say with Ayn Rand, her fiction work, I agree, it's very difficult to get through, but her personal essays, like The New Left, I really enjoyed that book because I could get through those essays, and it wasn't the chore of trying to get to the John Galt speech, which it turns out to be the speech is 60 pages or whatever it is, which, you know, all of it is very, very detailed and it drags on, and it's got a lot of great information in it, but her essays were short. They're the same way, but they're shorter, they're to the point, and each essay kind of focuses more on one issue.
And they provide, I would say, greater historical context to where she is in her belief system.
Right.
And so to that end, I think the nonfiction side, or the more autobiographical or explanatory stuff is probably more beneficial. It's like I love Stephen King, and I love Stephen King's fiction, but Stephen King on writing is also fantastic on really how to flesh out those ideas, so it's fascinating to be able to get in, and especially now in this day and age where you have Audible and you have podcasts. I travel a lot for the Grassroots Leadership Academy, and if I'm on a plane or I'm in a rental car somewhere, I'm listening to a podcast. So I'll just download an audiobook, and a book that's 1,000 pages that I wouldn't have the attention span for, to read it cover to cover hard copy. I can get through and listen to a couple of times. So it's really great to be exposed to these ideas, and I think a lot of people are coming to these ideas almost by accident. People find a video, a reason video online, or they find a podcast like this one, or they stumble upon an article that is, shows them a different side of an issue that they're trying to formulate an opinion on. And we've really democratized knowledge by having, social media and widespread access to, I guess, the collected wisdom of the ages through our smartphones and through the internet.
Absolutely. With places like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and, just all the different social media sites, you may click on a video of, I don't know, somebody slipping on the ice and falling. That's really funny. And then it auto plays to the next video, and suddenly you fall into like a Ben Shapiro hole, and you're watching Ben Shapiro talking to college kids. And then next thing you know, you're like, wait, what is this tiny little Jewish guy talking about? And then you start researching more, and then you find your Steven Crowders, and then you find, us, obviously, the Muddied Waters of Freedom. You find the Mighty Waters of Freedom, and then from there you start looking into the different groups, and that's when you find FEE and the Mises Institute and the Grassroots Leadership Academy and the Americans For Prosperity Foundation, and all of a sudden you're beginning to learn all about the freedoms on your own, as opposed to just being told what to think. You're actually learning and researching on your own time, because it's what you're now deciding you love.
And not only that, but also, people who are being exposed to these ideas, even when they don't realize it. There's some really cool things happening. And especially as I know we get into talking about messaging here in this podcast, is something as simple as Mike Rowe. So Mike Rowe has a show on Facebook. I think it's now 2 seasons in, called Returning the Favor.
Right.
And it's essentially, Rowe and his team find do-gooders in these communities that are really, taking on the responsibility that for many years people have said government should do this. And where government has failed, Mike has found these folks who are improving their community and showcasing that, showcasing their success. And that's something where, you think about the average American who watches a couple hours of television. Maybe they have a drama they like, or a show they like. If they find something like this and they say, oh, wow, there are good people in the world who are advancing essentially free societies, maybe even without knowing it, and they're doing good and they're helping others. Why don't we have more of this? And it really creates this this atmosphere of building up the idea of the American experiment, but also the notion of self-reliance and working within the communities to advance opportunity rather than relying on a central planner.
Right. I mean, I've been recently, as of this year, I've been calling that the dominoes effect, where, Domino's is going around and fixing the potholes for people because the cities can't get to it. And it's because we don't need the government to do these things. Instead, we have private businesses or private individuals who are going around and doing it out of the goodness of their own heart. Now, granted, Domino's is probably doing it mostly for publicity, but it is an answer to the issues.
Well, and I always tell people there is a range of reasons people do things. So if you look at the range, it is a left-right spectrum. You may say altruism on the right side, and that's doing things out of the good of your heart. And on the left side, you have greed or self-interest. And everyone operates somewhere along that spectrum. And I'm not going to I'm not going to necessarily denigrate someone or a company or an entity that does something knowing that they're going to receive good publicity in return, because it's almost Pavlovian in the sense that we want good actions to be rewarded. And as we may dig into this, but the criminal justice system, you think about this, rewarding inmates who are in the system for good behavior, for improving their lives. And so, we really do respond to that positive stimuli or whatever you call it. And I think showcasing that or rewarding it is really beneficial, and it creates more opportunities to engage in that, which as we may get into is what I call, and what my network, the network that I work for, calls virtuous cycles of self-improvement. And it's where when you, Matt, or me, or my sister, who is a hairstylist, when we improve our lives, then we're able to go out and improve the lives of those in our communities. And so it's a really cool thing to see as we talk about free societies and what it looks like to minimize the barriers that stand in people's way from achieving their potential.
Right. And just to clarify, by no way was I trying to denigrate Domino's for doing that just for the publicity or anything like that. Since they started doing that, they're basically the only pizza place I go to because of what they're giving back to a community.
Oh, certainly. And I definitely wasn't calling you out for it. But if you think about a couple of years ago as well, after one of the big tsunamis in the Pacific, Coca-Cola suspended its ad budget. It was, I think, a couple $1 million. They suspended their South Asian and Pacific ad budget and instead diverted those resources to providing bottles of water in folks in the affected area. And certainly there was a financial incentive for them to do so, but it also improved the lives of the people in the affected area.
Absolutely.
And so, we look at this and people say, Milton Friedman was a proponent that greed is good. And if you think about it, in both of those actions, both Domino's and Coca-Cola, you could say they were greedy in the sense that they knew the direct payoff for engaging in that activity, but it also directly positively impacted the lives of those who encountered that. So definitely those who were victims of the tsunami, and also those people who are just. It is in Domino's best interest that their delivery drivers can get to your home without hitting a pothole and flattening a tire.
Exactly.
So and in turn, that is improving our community. Something as simple as filling a pothole when the government fails. We joke, and especially libertarians joke, who will build the roads? But even when government fails in their promise to maintain and upkeep those roads, we see that there are ways to do and provide that. And it's really cool. I think we are in an unprecedented period of time where access to information, where access to capital, so actually being able to fund or finance or engage in this activity, and the willingness of people to step out and do something good. I think we're in a period of time where all of those are aligned, and we really have an opportunity to improve ourselves and our communities without, and not as overtly as saying I'm doing this because the government won't, but in a sense, stepping in unwittingly or unknowingly and providing those goods, those services, those opportunities without government permission and without that that oversight.
And as people who are freedom-loving people, libertarian-leaning, conservative, whatever, even if you go as far as my co-host Spike, anarchist, we don't need government. The fact that people get together and are doing these things without government intervention or without government force just shows that, yes, these things still can be accomplished even without government saying this needs to happen or stealing money from us in order to do these projects, which take too long and cost too much.
And it bolsters the notion that Adam Smith wrote about in Wealth of Nations, that there is this invisible hand that guides economic activity, because what you'll see is those resources are diverted. So if we have, for instance, the hurricanes that hit the Gulf Coast over the summer and in the last couple of years, we see people contributing money or working through their churches or diverting resources. So those opportunities still exist, and there doesn't have to be someone out of Washington who, as Hayek wrote, who decides how many pigs are to be slaughtered or how many shoes are to be made, or what prices they should be set at, because we decide that as consumers, or we decide that as people diverting those resources. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, celebrities, people like Kid Rock and a few others, who have gone to Walmart and paid off the layaway, everything that a couple hundred customers have put on layaway for Christmas. And certainly they get good press out of it. You couldn't hire a better press team for like a Kid Rock to say, you know what, you should go spend $30,000 to pay off 400 people's layaway purchases at Walmart. That's a drop in the bucket for his income, and it provides him good publicity. But it dramatically improves the lives of hundreds of people who perhaps didn't know where that money was going to come from, or could have done, wish they could have done a little bit more for their children around Christmas. And so, or freed up their capital to go and do well for others. We constantly hear, especially this time of year, people leaving large tips at restaurants, or people paying for the meal of the person behind them in the drive-through
line.
And all of those things are certainly, they're small acts of kindness, but they're acts that improve the lives and well-being of the people, not only of the person who engages in it, but of the people around us.
Yeah, and so you're from Tennessee, so I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe Brad Paisley, I could be wrong on the countries, I'm not a big country guy. I believe Brad Paisley and his wife, Kimberly Williams, from the Bride movie with Steve Martin, they are opening a food bank for the less fortunate in Nashville, where it's like a free grocery store. But they're setting it up as a grocery store, so that way when you go with your children, it's like you're going to a grocery store, as opposed to you're going to get, your free donations to give the people, to help people out who actually need it, as well as give them some sort of dignity while doing it.
Oh yeah, and sure enough, yeah, they have. And I think the first story was in October of this year about this. It's called, if you give me just a moment, I think it's just called The Store. But as you talk about, providing services, and especially food donations, providing that dignity, and it's something as simple. You touched on it. Something as simple as a family being able to walk into a grocery store that looks and feels like a grocery store, that doesn't look and feel like a bread line, is one of those small acts that allows people slowly and surely to improve their lives. So it's really cool to see this kind of thing, and people are doing it, again, a mixture of altruism, or the goodness of their own heart, or self-interest and greed. For a long time, and still today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church, has provided these sort of food storehouses for their membership, and even for people who aren't Mormons, who fall on hard times. And so we see that, and to sort of drive us in the direction of of the topic of conversation is to look at this and say, how can we talk about breaking down the barriers that we have, be they internal or external barriers. A lot of times external barriers are government imposed. Internal barriers are things like education and confidence in your capacity to go out and accomplish on your own or with some help. And so how do we empower people to break down those barriers that allows them to improve their lives, which then in turn allows them to improve the lives of others in their community? And I think that is something where, like, there's a joke about two children. You put two children in separate rooms, and one is the eternal pessimist, and that kid has a bunch of broken toys in the room, and the other is the eternal optimist, and he's in this room just playing around in horse manure. And, when confronted or asked why he's so happy to be in the room full of horse manure, the eternal optimist says, "There's got to be a pony in here somewhere." And I'm that kid, because I think even in, sometimes the headlines aren't that great. I think we're at a time where more and more people are realizing they can improve their lives and improve the lives of others, and really engage in what the Grassroots Leadership Academy and what Americans For Prosperity Foundation is calling this free society, where people improve their lives and improve the lives of others, and in turn we create a society of mutual benefit.
Yeah. So getting to the messaging aspect, which is what you've been working on, what you've been doing best, and like that's all we talked about when we were across each other at booths at the YAL conference. When it comes to messaging, what is the best way for people to message liberty? Because when you look on the internet, when you look on social media, you look on the Facebooks, the Twitters, the way at least I perceive it, the way that most people are messaging liberty doesn't come off as anything anybody else would ever want, because we're all aggressive, we're all angry, we're all going after the person, trying to insult their intelligence and act like they aren't as well read as us, which 95% of the time is probably true. But again, that's not going to be helping out with the messaging of liberty. So what is it that we need to focus on?
So a lot of what I talk about, and especially as we figure out how to have these conversations, we are on the heels of just a month ago we celebrated Thanksgiving, where many of your listeners spent time with their families over dinner. Undoubtedly, they had that liberal aunt who still has her Obama 2008 bumper sticker, or that Trump supporting uncle, and we talk about it, we fear it, we anticipate that it's coming. Those political discussions at the dinner table at Thanksgiving or even at Christmas, and I think that what is indicative of that is many people don't think about high level political philosophy. When you talk about lowering tax rates, when you talk about the trade deficit, when you talk about the budget deficit, or whatever the issues are, most people don't make a personal connection to those issues, because a lot of, especially at the federal level, a lot of the policy stuff is esoteric. Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, got it right. He attacked in the 2016 Republican primary. He went after Kentucky Senator Rand Paul for talking about libertarian ideas in sort of the ether, in this esoteric conversation about liberty. And unfortunately for us, for those who spend a lot of their time advocating for liberty, we are sort of in the ether. We are sort of communicating those esoteric ideas. What we have to do is find out where those ideas interact with people in their daily lives. And so what does it look like? It looks like a small business owner trying to launch a new business. It looks like parents trying to homeschool their children, or trying to pull their kids out of a failing system. It looks like a young person. Millennials are sometimes derided as the want it now generation. But it looks like a millennial trying to create that next app that makes our lives simpler and better for less. And all of these opportunities During the height of the conversation over the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act earlier this year, earlier in 2018, the Nancy Pelosi said that it was just crumbs what the tax reform would provide for the average American. And at the time, the average the average American would receive about $1,000 more in the calendar year in 2018 if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed. And so the way I made that real for activists across the country as I was talking about it is I said, what would you do with $88 more a month? And people really, like, I look at my paycheck every 2 weeks and I say, what more can I put into retirement? What more can I put into maybe my health savings account? And when you ask someone point blank, what would you do with $88 more a month? You get a lot of really great answers. You get, I would pay more on my mortgage. I would plan better for retirement. I would take my family out to a nice dinner. I would save for a summer vacation. And so you really make that policy tangible and real. During the conversation about Obamacare, really for the last 8 years, the Affordable Care Act, it was most real when people went out to their mailboxes and they got a letter from Blue Cross Blue Shield or from Aetna or whomever saying their rate was being increased or their plan was being canceled altogether.
Right.
So 98% of Americans are just trying to put food on the table. They're trying to make ends meet. They're trying to get their kids to soccer practice on time. They are not thinking about 2,700 pages of healthcare. And so to communicate liberty in a way that's real and meaningful, we have to talk about it where it really hits the pocketbook or where it really impacts them on a daily basis. For instance, I work, our national headquarters is in Arlington, Virginia. And a couple of years ago, there's a lot of really great food trucks out near our office that park during the lunch hour. And I love food trucks. It's really cool. I can try, food that I never would have had the access to with normal brick and mortar in the neighborhood. And the trucks are different every day, and they communicate on social media which trucks are going to be there. And the restaurant association in that neighborhood, feeling the pinch from the food trucks, feeling the increased competition, banded together and hired a lobbyist and attempted to get those food trucks banned. And so if I were a normal human being, which I'm not, and people who are engaged in the fight for liberty on a daily basis in an official capacity are weirdos. With all due respect to you and to the listeners, we're weird. But if I had just been, a guy working in an office building in that neighborhood and all of a sudden the food trucks disappeared, I would wonder what the heck was going on. And if I was so compelled and so upset by it, I might organize my neighbors and figure out, how we could bring them back. Right. And so, looking for those opportunities to where it really impacts someone in their daily lives. I would say the second thing is understanding that no matter where you are on the political spectrum, if you are a Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez socialist, or you are a Ron Paul libertarian, or you are a Tom Cotton, neoconservative, there are issues. There's at least one issue where you can find agreement on with almost anybody. And what I do in my conversations with people left, right, and center is I try to find an issue where we agree first, because that allows us to build trust. It allows us to understand that we are both operating in good faith, that most people who want to solve these problems are doing it. They're operating in good faith the best way they know how. Unfortunately, we just agree on the path to get there. People who believe in more government think that there are benevolent people in government who want to take care of us. And if we institute this program, it shall be so. And I don't believe that. And I think that people working in their communities in their private capacity are the best drivers for social progress and improving the lives of others. And so, sitting down and finding that opportunity where you do agree and then building out from there is a great way to start the conversation.
Right. Like, so with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, recently, now that we're in this government shutdown and somehow everything is still moving ahead in this country and everything's fine, even with no government currently running, she said, next time we do a government shutdown, I believe that the Congress people's paychecks should be furloughed. That would be a great place for me to start with her, because at least on that I can agree.
And I think, and I've seen that, I'm, as someone who is, I'm scrolling Facebook during the holidays. I've seen that a lot, and I've seen a lot of conservatives or a lot of people who consider themselves on the right side of the political spectrum who have been shocked that they agree. And I think it's funny. It's funny that a lot of times people say that they're shocked. But if we did it more often, if we listened to people with whom we don't agree more often, we would be less shocked that we actually do agree on more issues than places where we disagree. I think there are people who who benefit from dividing us, and there is a tribalism that is perpetuated by the two-party system that is sometimes it's not particularly beneficial to having those conversations. There is no benefit to a Republican Party entity for a Democrat to vote for one of their for an initiative. Likewise, there's no incentive for a Democrat elected official to work closely with the Republicans to advance some goal, because there's no reward in that. It doesn't bring them closer to re-election. It doesn't raise them more money. It gets them in this realm of being called moderates or squishes or sellouts or establishment, and so they are dissuaded from working together just by the nature of the party structure and that process. And so I think if people sat down with people they disagreed with more often, we would find out that we actually have more in common than we realize, and we all want to solve the problems that our communities face. I worked on a campaign for city council in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago. And it was a Democrat candidate for city council who was, quite frankly, more conservative than the Republican candidate. And it is in Northeast D.C., which is a large African-American population. And as I went door to door, everyone who invited me into their home, almost without exception, had portraits of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Barack Obama prominently displayed in their living rooms. That is not, and that is not a culture that I grew up knowing. But every single person I spoke to
from rural Murfreesboro, Tennessee, you didn't grow up with that culture?
No, not at all. But everyone I spoke to wanted three things. They wanted good schools, they wanted safe streets, and they wanted economic opportunity. And when I tell that to activists at Americans For Prosperity Foundation events or Grassroots Leadership Academy trainings, there's almost you can hear the jaws hit the floor, because they understand, wow, those individuals with whom I have little in common want the same thing that I want. They just, by and large, in many instances, believe there's a different way to get there. So being able to sit down and hash those issues out on an individual basis without the scrolling cryon of Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and without the shouting talking head of Lawrence O'Donnell or Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity, we really find that there are broader areas of agreement than we previously understood.
Which, yes, that is the one thing that I always, whenever I do the family get together, which I don't actually get a lot of opportunities to do anymore because we're all spread out, typically I try to find the one area that we can all agree on. Unfortunately, we are spread out on the spectrum. We go from the far left to the neocon right and everywhere else in between. So it's very hard to find the one thing that everybody agrees on. So typically what I find that I do is I'll team up with somebody at the table and I'll agree with them on something just to defend them, because I can defend their point. So like with my little sister, who's very far left, she's very anti-war. My older sister and my dad are neocons. So, they're very, we should bomb them all, blow it all up. And so my little sister isn't great at defending her points very well, but I know how to. So then I'll team up with her on that, where she's also very pro universal health care, and I know the opposite side of that. So since they can't argue their point that well without being insulting, I guess would be the best way to put it, I'll team up with them just to ease that conversation, just to make it a little bit more palatable for her so she doesn't feel like she's being attacked. As opposed to like when I went anti-war on my own, and I was told that I was going to get punched in the face if I kept going. I was like, well, that's very peaceful of you. But the messaging aspect of the Libertarian Party, of not just the Libertarian Party, but just liberty in general, which often does get muddled with the Libertarian Party, gets so convoluted because we have so many issues with people out there saying that they believe in liberty, but only in the instances where it really matters to them. There's no cohesive answer for what is liberty and what is not liberty. Now, granted, you and I probably look at it as, the individual. Well, I know I do. I'm not going to speak for you. I apologize for that. The individual is the smallest minority. And as long as me, as an individual, am not harming anybody else or taking their property or hurting their property, whatever I do doesn't really matter. So each topic that I go to, I attempt to get it back to that basic principle. Would you say that that's the easy? Would that be the correct way to do it, or am I misshooting?
Well, I think that when talking about philosophical consistency, you're probably at the closest place. But there are certainly people who maybe are interested in school choice, so they want what I would call educational anarchy. So anybody could provide any level of educational opportunity for any child anytime. So it could be all homeschooling or parochial or charter or vouchers or whatever. But that person may vehemently disagree with, say, for instance, cannabis legalization or descheduling, and because they believe there's a disproportionately negative impact on the social fabric or what have you. And so certainly, and likewise, I'm sure there are people who think that cannabis should be legalized or descheduled who wouldn't agree with educational opportunity. And so I think that a lot of so many of those conversations are one-on-one in nature. I don't think by and large that we can assert some philosophical consistency from a talking head on television.
Right.
And so it is up to people like you, people like me, programs like this, trainings like the Grassroots Leadership Academy, to do it either in small doses or almost in a one-on-one setting. All of your listeners listen to this show in their individual capacity, but you are communicating to an audience. But for some, there may be an understanding that you're communicating just to them. So I think things at this level, at the community level, in our trainings and on programs like this, you're able to have a more in-depth or intimate or familiar conversation about this, so that you can potentially change someone's mind or move them in the direction of supporting, more freedom and more opportunity.
Before the show, you were we were discussing quickly I can't believe I didn't write this one down. The Koch Foundation grants.
Yes.
The Charles Koch grants. Now, what is it that the grants do? Who do the grants go to?
So there is a broad network of organizations, of entities, of donors that look to improve communities. Basically, there's a firm belief that there are four key institutions in society, and they are government, which has an outsized impact in our lives. There is community, and so that could be churches or nonprofits or the family structure. There is education, and that could be universities or K-12 or Khan Academy or Learned Liberty. And then there's business. And across those four key institutions, the network that I'm employed in, sometimes colloquially called the Koch Network, there are there are two brothers, Charles and David Koch. They are philanthropists and businessmen. David has been involved in New York City, in the community in New York City. He has donated to hospitals. He's donated to museums at the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. There is a David Koch Hall of Human Achievement. And so these individuals really care. One, they're successful businessmen, and two, in that capacity, they are able to financially support entities and organizations which make our country great. And so things like hospitals, things like museums. We talk about those four key institutions. The Charles Koch Foundation last year, or perhaps it was earlier this year, teamed up with the United Negro College Fund to provide $50 million in scholarship opportunities for Black recipients of the scholarships to study business, and in part, if I understand it correctly, to study the way the philosophy of a lot of Koch Industries businesses, which is called market-based management, which I think has been a leading philosophy that has allowed them to be so successful. So there's one that is playing in the education realm, that is providing financial support for Black students who are recipients of United Negro College Fund grants or scholarships to go out and study business and economics. There's an organization called Stand Together, which works in the community space. So we've talked about business. Now let's talk about community. One of the cool things about Stand Together is they are basically almost a venture capital organization for nonprofits and charities. So they go out and find those nonprofits, for instance, like the Phoenix Gyms, which I'll come back to in just a moment, to go out and improve the community. And so they are recipients of grants and contributions to that end. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Phoenix Gyms. Phoenix Gym is a gym that is catered to recovering drug addicts. So if you've been sober for 48 hours, you can use Phoenix Gyms for free. And what they've done throughout the country is we talk about how do we fight. One of the national conversations now is the opioid epidemic and the opioid crisis.
Right.
So Phoenix Gym in the community is finding these individuals and empowering them to shake that addiction and providing them with a healthy outlet to engage in those activities. And so one of our partners, Stand Together, has provided financial support for that. They're also one of the latest recipients is something in Dallas called Cafe Momentum, which is basically a restaurant that hires that you take a 1-year internship as a young person who is currently going through the criminal justice system. So basically they take at-risk youth, they cycle them through a 1-year internship where they get paid to work at this restaurant. They go through all the positions at the restaurant, from cook to waiter to front of the house. And it teaches them, one, it invests in their self-esteem, so an internal barrier, and two, it provides them hard skills to go out and be successful so they don't have to engage in criminal activity. So we've now talked about education and community, and I think part of that ties into business. So
Right.
Providing financial support for businesses that are engaging in what Charles Koch calls as good profit. So a business operating in working in the best interest of the people. This is creating a society of mutual benefit where you create a good product that people want, and people buy that product because it's a good product that they want. And so all of that sort of trickles out into the broader society, where then unfortunately for many of us, it encounters the firm hand of government. And to the extent that we're engaged in donations that change that aspect, I think a lot of that is handled through Americans for Prosperity, our sister organization, which attempts to change public policy. And so you see that there are There are institutions established on campuses like the one at Middle Tennessee State University, the Political Economy Research Institute. There are scholarship funds that are established. There are donations to museums and hospitals. There are investments in community organizations, and all of these things taken, if you step back and look at all of them together, show an investment in advancing a community where people benefit by benefiting others, where breaking down internal and external barriers allows us to engage in what I mentioned earlier as virtuous cycles of mutual benefit, where you improve your life, and when you do that, you can improve the lives of others around you.
So recently, I know one of the things that the Koch brothers care about a lot is criminal justice reform, which, thanks to people like Kanye West, Jared Kushner, Rand Paul, Cory Booker, that's been kind of in the news recently. We've recently gotten criminal justice reform signed by the president. But on the lower grassroots end scale, I know that the Koch brothers have consistently been fighting for it on their own. They've been going with they took away the box. What was it? I can't remember what the name of that.
Ban the box.
Ban the box. That was what it was called.
Yeah, absolutely. So Koch Industries recently, in the last 2 years or so, instituted a ban the box, which is on an application. Basically, it says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And if you check that box, yes, you can reasonably assume 99% of the time that hiring manager is going to discard that application. And that is one of the many myriad things that makes it harder for someone who is back out in society to be able to improve their lives. And so, yeah, they banned that in the business practice. And we have spent the last 1.5 to 2 years educating activists around criminal justice issues and seeing great success in having standard sort of conservative activists, which I would say is a bulk of the people who engage with us, embrace these issues and embrace this notion of criminal justice reform, certainly.
Right. I know that you just recently did a show with Caleb Franz, a good friend of ours here at Muddied Waters Media, on his show Mill Liberty. He also has his nonprofit, the Mill Liberty Initiative, and one of the projects they're working on is the Reintegration Project, which I've got certain ties to as well. But in it, they are going around trying to find private businesses that are willing to hire nonviolent felons, so that way they can get reintegrated into society. This is the sort of example that I think many of us need to be setting when we're going out talking about liberty and talking about what we want to see in the world. I think that Caleb is actually doing it on shoestring budget. Like, I know he is doing everything himself, working very hard at it. And it is that kind of example that he is setting that I think many people in the movement need to be looking at, because he's actually going out trying to do things in a free market kind of way without using the government intervention.
And that does two things. And I think what Caleb is trying to do is laudable, and I think he will find some success there. It does two things. It allows us to message. We've been talking about how to message these ideas. It allows us to message on these issues by putting a face to these issues, by saying, look, I was recently at an event in Phoenix, a criminal justice reform event, where they brought members of the 4 key institutions to the table, and the one who represented business said basically that there was a consortium of 100 small businesses in the Phoenix Valley who are all interested in hiring people as they return to society from incarceration. And just that opportunity, either there in Phoenix or with what Caleb is doing with his initiative, is empowering people. And it allows us, again, one, to message, and two, to actually put our money where our mouth is, or to show that these policies and these principles work in practice. And so when somebody sees that there's a business partnering with something like the Mill Liberty Initiative or some other similar organization, and it's being successful, then people change their minds, or people think about a policy in a different way. And particularly as it has been so popular in the last 6 months, really, to talk about criminal justice reform, that is one of the hundreds of ways that people are showing that criminal justice reform can work, if every institution is engaging in their beneficial role. And so that is with Caleb, it's that community element, but it's partnering with businesses, and it possibly might even grow into providing people with education. There's when you're in prison for a number of years, some of your social skills are eroded.
Right.
And you're basically, you are, to be quite frank, you're engaging and interacting with people who had criminal intent when they came in, and it likely fosters a criminal economy. And so to work to re-socialize, or to teach people behavior that isn't antisocial. It's not just, we talk about empowering recently incarcerated people with the hard skills, like being a carpenter or a mechanic or something like that. But there are also soft skills, like how to de-escalate a disagreement in the workplace rather than resorting to physical violence. There is interacting with people of different socioeconomic status, so that you work in harmony, working with people of different backgrounds than others. And so there are a lot of those soft skills that entities are also looking to empower people and train them to engage. So yeah, there's so much going on, and what Caleb is doing is a not insignificant, and by that I mean it has the capacity to be very impactful, drop in that bucket of overall advancing society toward one of mutual benefit.
Yeah. With the last time I was in jail, I've never been to prison, but the last time I was in jail, which was, 6 years ago now, 7 years ago, was in Tennessee. And what I saw when I was in there that time, I was in a huge cell block, and you definitely could see the people that were trying to get away from that lifestyle, and then the people who were trying to cultivate that lifestyle. They had sort of cordoned off into two separate groups in this large cell block that had like 75 people in it. It was definitely a real learning experience for me, one that I didn't speak a lot during, which is very bizarre for me. I just kind of sat back and I was like, I'm just, for the however long I'm going to be stuck in here, I'm just going to try to keep my head down. So the social skills absolutely will erode off, especially if you're somebody like me who's just like, okay, I'm just going to keep my head down, not going to cause any trouble. I just sat there silently, reading whatever prison manual they gave me. Or you had the other people that were working on plans on how they were going to better their lives whenever they got out. And then you had the other people who I think were planning on being there for a long time, planning their way to make their stay as easy as possible, even though it may not have been in the most ethical way. So it's easy to see how that can happen after an extended stay, which is why being able to have access to some sort of education, especially the social aspect, is very important when you're in.
Well, we talk a lot about evidence-based solutions to the criminal justice situation, and evidence shows this is something we didn't really talk about at the beginning, but I think it's something that we are constantly reminded of, is conservatives and libertarians oftentimes communicate with facts and figures. And we say, look, here are all the facts, believe my position. And we have to be able to weave those facts into the stories we tell. But so let's look at it. We use evidence-based research that shows that for every $1 invested in reentry programs, in education in the prison system, in opportunities for inmates to improve their lives, for every $1 invested, you see up to $5 in savings for reincarceration. So the reason I have these figures is I was recently in Little Rock, Arkansas for a criminal justice reform event. And the average length of time people spend in the Arkansas penal system is 4 years and 11 months. So 90 or 95% of people are getting out. On average, they're spending almost 5 years in prison. And Arkansas spends $22,000 a year on each inmate. And so on average, you're already burdening the state to the tune of $100,000. So wouldn't we, like a society, especially as people who are limited government or conservative or libertarian, wouldn't we like a society that saves money rather than constantly re-incarcerating the same person? And I want to tell a story about this. There's a guy currently back in prison named Matthew Charles. And Matthew, in his late teens and early 20s, in the early to mid 90s, committed some pretty heinous crimes back to back. And he was ultimately sentenced to 35 years in prison. And as he entered prison, he immediately began to reform his life. He found faith. He started, studying. He was reading books in the prison library. He was helping other inmates with their appeals processes. And in 21 years, after having served 21 years of that sentence, Matthew Charles was released by a federal judge by the name of Kevin Sharp in the Middle Tennessee District, who said, "It is very clear to me," and this is from the judge, "very clear to me that Matthew has righted his situation. He has corrected his life. He is preparing himself to become a productive member of society." And Kevin Sharp at the time was a federal judge, and he made the decision to release Matthew Charles 14 years early. And Matthew spent 2 years in Nashville. He got a job. He got a place to stay. He had transportation to and from work. He got a girlfriend. He was volunteering his time at the food bank. And 2 years into his freedom, where he was not a threat to society, he caused no trouble in that period of freedom. U.S. attorneys said, "Unfortunately, Mr. Charles, you haven't served your entire sentence." And in May of this year, they sent him back. And if there is any story that we should be highlighting about how the criminal justice system should work, it is the story of Matthew Charles and how he really sought to improve his life, and in turn, when he was in prison, improve the lives of those around him. And when he was released, he further went on to prove that he had corrected himself. So when we talk about these issues, and especially we talk about criminal justice reform, we want to find these individuals who, and look, I know Matthew Charles is not the rule. He is the exception to the rule in many instances. But we should reward that kind of behavior. And we should encourage other people to say, if you improve your life, if you prove to us that you are going to be released into society and not be a threat, not engage in antisocial behavior and activity, then we'll release you. And I think that is what, we sort of dancing around it. But the First Step Act, which the president signed in the last week or two, is really going to provide that opportunity. And it is exactly what it sounds. It is a first step in reforming a system that for too long has been, quote, tough on crime, but not smart on crime and not smart on taxpayers. And so I think many states, including a big red state like Texas, including Georgia, and including many others, have engaged in criminal justice reform legislation in the last 10 years. And we've got now enough data to prove that many of these programs work. And so they're being implemented, hopefully at the federal level, and hopefully this will expand into greater reform efforts.
Right. I hadn't heard about Matthew Charles, and that's just moronic, in my opinion, that they would do that. That you can't see my face right now, but everybody that's watching this video can. But when you told me that when the feds said that he had to go back to prison, like the look on my face, was pure heartbreak.
Well, and you know, to tie a bow on that story, the federal judge who released him, Kevin Sharp, who, by the way, was appointed a lifetime appointment. He's a federal judge for the rest of his life. He was so angry at the system that tied his hands and made him unable to provide this sort of relief that he resigned his judgeship and is now working. He's been to the White House a number of times, working not only on Matthew Charles' issue, but on the broader issue of criminal justice reform. And so it is infuriating. The judge who the judge who sentenced Weldon Angelos, who was sentenced to 55 years in prison for selling $350 worth of marijuana in Utah.
Right.
Some of those instances while in possession of a firearm, sentenced at Weldon to 55 years, and immediately in his sentencing statement said this is a ridiculous sentence. It sentences not only you to spending most of your life in prison, but it sentences your family in a lifetime without a father and a brother. And ultimately, Weldon was released during the Obama administration. And he now, talk about this virtuous cycles of mutual benefit. Now Weldon is traveling the country, engaging in criminal justice reform conversations and showing people that it can be successful. And so I think, again, as people who believe in liberty and limited government, being able to humanize those stories, humanize public policy, allows us to show, hey, this is a good policy, or hey, this isn't a good policy. And I think that we should be more interested in finding those and personalizing those stories so that more people say, you know what, that makes sense. And that's the common sense thing to do, which I think so many of the policies that we advocate and engage in are.
Right. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on. That's just about all the time we have for today. Do you have anything you want to pitch, plug, promote right before we head out?
The Grassroots Leadership Academy is in 36 states with Americans For Prosperity Foundation. And if your listeners are interested in our programming, I know we're in Florida, where you broadcast. We're in Tennessee, where I am now. We're in 34 other states. You can find us at grassrootsleadershipacademy.org. We are on Twitter and Instagram at GLA Training. We are also on Facebook. Just search Grassroots Leadership Academy. And then if you want to follow along with my hijinks and antics across the country, I'm on most social media platforms at Matthew Hurtt, which is a total of 4 T's, MatthewHurtt. And with that, I hope to see you and your listeners on the road as I travel the country advancing freedom and opportunity.
And I will say that I follow you on most social media platforms, and it's actually quite entertaining for anybody out there. For everybody else, thank you all for tuning in. Definitely appreciate it. Remember, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Muddied Waters of Freedom. You can find us on the Instagram at Muddied_Waters, or you can find us on Twitter. No, sorry, man. I just totally messed that up. On Facebook at Muddied Waters of Freedom, at Twitter at Muddied_Waters, at Instagram at Muddied Waters of Freedom, or you can find this in every episode at muddiedwatersoffreedom.com. Thank you to the Narcissist Cookbook, which is another Matt. This is a very Matt-heavy episode today. The Narcissist Cookbook for the music at the beginning and the end of this episode. And remember, people, get back to writing, because it is the easiest way that we can make a difference.
I am swinging from a 7-story window, throwing parties in a 10-by-7 cell. It's astounding the lengths I'll go to convince the whole damn world I don't need anybody's help. Yeah, I am waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. I'll try to use your body as a life raft, cause if there's room enough for one, there must be room enough for two. I'll sail the good ship you into the sunset, sipping on savory water till my liver turns blue. Sha-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Play a song for broadcast in the evening news, I will be relieved. La, I am waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. I'm waving while I drown. Don't bother swimming out to save me, I will only drag you down. La, 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 singing, hey, hey, alright, yeah, I wrote that one myself. It's astounding the lengths I'll go to convince the whole damn world I don't need anybody's help.